Okay, everybody, thank you for being here. I think it's the time of the year when I'd like to sort of look back at 2011, do a little bit of looking ahead into 2012, and especially in terms of our strategic plan for the laboratory, which has a longer time frame, but it's time for us to see what it is we're doing this coming year, given the conditions that we expect, and that's probably the hardest part of this to discuss, and our goals, our long-term goals. What do we need to be doing this year, based on how we've been doing? So I want to talk to you on these topics. The first being safety performance. This is both a look back at how 2011 went and what we want to do going forward from that. I'll give you a little update on the blueprint, the projects that are underway and completed, and some of the successes that have emerged from taking that approach, some of the challenges that we're still facing as a result of elements of that approach, and I'll try to cover some of those. I wanted to focus a lot of my attention on the strategic plan. This is something I'm sure you know by now. We create a 10-year plan every year, presented to the Department of Energy Office of Science, and but it's not just a check-the-box exercise. It's a serious attempt to forecast where we're going, to be prepared for the outcomes that we want to achieve, and to see how we stack up in supporting the mission of the Department of Energy and the nation generally. I'll say a little bit about awards that the lab and its staff have garnered over the past year. You've probably read all that if you read the Monday memo, because I try to do that as it happens. But just looking back on it, it's kind of impressive, and I'll show you that. And then finish with my favorite topic, the budget outlook. This is not like the weather where everybody talks about it, nobody does anything about it. This is more like everybody talks about it, nobody knows anything about it. And so I don't have a lot of information to convey, but we have to start looking ahead. And I know a little bit about what's likely to come, and so we'll get into that with the hope of saving some time for questions and answers. And so there are microphones in the aisles and up here in front for people to line up and ask questions. And I will work on them, or I see some of my favorite subject matter experts in the first couple of rows, so I'll tap on them to help me answer some. People are watching this via webcast. They can send mail to Jim Green. His email address is right there. He's here in the audience with a functioning laptop back there, and he will step up to the mic and ask questions on behalf of the people who are emailing questions in. So I hope to save enough time to get to all of that at the end. So let's get going and start talking about safety performance. I'm sure you all know that FY10 was our best year from the point of view of safety performance, and we slid back in FY11. Never mind the rates, they were significantly higher, but the way it counts is that more people got hurt here. That's never something that's part of our plan, and so dealing with that, fixing our processes, our way of doing business, our attention on what we do with the idea of reducing the number of people that get hurt every year, that's got to be top of mind for all of us. Looking back, though, at the last year, here's a particular contributory factor and a particularly noticeable category of injuries that maybe we ought to focus on. We had a bad winter. I'm sure you all remember that. We had a record number of days closed last year, I believe, last fiscal year, earlier this calendar year. And 8 people sustained serious injuries, recordable injuries or injuries requiring time off to recover as a result of the weather. Nobody got hurt during the heroic efforts to clean the site up, the actual snow removal. But some people got hurt with the usual slips, trips, and falls on bad surfaces. Some people got hurt, toting around bags of ice melt to try to deal with the problem, so some overexertion occurred as well. We didn't have any injuries related to weather the previous year. Now, that doesn't make up the whole difference between last year and, FY10 and FY11, but it was a contributory factor, and that's a piece of weather that we also can't do anything about, so we're going to have to try to take more precautions and learn some lessons from last year's winter weather. One important thing about it was that we had, despite the very good job of cleaning the site, we had periodic episodes of melting of some of the accumulated snow and then refreezing on surfaces, making slippery walking. So secondary and tertiary cleanups have to be part of our thinking, and people should be on the lookout for places where that's happening near their buildings. Some efforts have been taken since the winter to try to minimize those, but they'll never go completely away. So it just requires attention on everybody's part. And dealing with those frozen puddles with ice melt is what caused at least some of the injuries under overexertion, but that tends to be an important factor for us. People not mindful of what it is they're lifting or moving, not prepared to do it, not positioned right to do it, whatever. In fact, if you look at the performance so far in FY12, there are 2 recordable incidents on the safety page. One of them has to do with overexertion, and the other has to do with a fall. So these kinds of things will continue to plague us if people aren't paying attention. One important positive note from this past year about this was that we focused our efforts on the people who do the riskiest work, mostly out in the field or tradespeople working in buildings, and among other things worked through the IFM process on enhanced work planning. In areas where we did that, we noticed during the year a marked improvement in the rate of injuries, to the point where it looked more like last year or better in some areas. And so our rates and our number of injuries for this year not as bad as they might have been if not for the attention on particular jobs and the risks associated with them and improved work planning around that. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm trying to shake a cold, and I'm going to be sniffling through this talk. A recent event with potential safety implications happened very recently, and you probably read about this in a statement we put out at the end of last week. We had a radiological event in which some radiological material was dispersed in a lab vehicle and got on 2 RadCon techs in several locations related to their work, and in the personal vehicle of a 3rd employee who gave one of these guys a ride to the cafeteria. There was more in the note that more to say about the details of this. We're still doing the investigation, but suffice it to say, we feel we need to take a close look at all radiological activity on site, and we'll do a series of stand-downs, still being designed in most cases, and probably different in different directorates depending on the level of risk, to review our policies, procedures, our training, and how we carry out this work. This event had no health impacts on the workers involved, and all of the dispersed activities was cleaned up almost all the same day, and all of it by now, which is fortunate. But this is a serious matter and a wake-up call to us that maybe our practices are not as good as they need to be in the handling of radiological materials. The statement that you saw, we also gave to the press on Friday afternoon. I don't think there have been many or any inquiries back about it, but we did that after discussion with the Department of Energy, who also takes this event very seriously. And so you may hear more about it, and you'll certainly hear more about it as we do the stand-downs, because it'll affect much work that's done on site, and you may be involved in that. So let's look ahead to FY12 in this regard. I don't mean just the radiological, but safety generally. And remember our roles in creating a safety culture that produces a safe workplace. We see variations in our safety performance over time, going back for years. There's a lot of ups and downs, and I think that's in part due to waxing and waning of leadership and worker attention on safety. We do well for a while. People sort of put other of the many pressing issues we have to deal with ahead of that, and then it starts to slide back like FY11. And then we get our attention on it again. We have to stop doing that. We have to have a longer attention span on safety. In fact, it has to be continuous. So part of what we want to try to do going forward is maintain that focus on safety. Among other things I want to do to help us in this regard is to do a safety survey among the whole staff. And I'm going to do this sort of a quarter of the staff at a time over the next period of time to examine people's attitudes on safety culture, on the role of leadership, and generally gauge employee engagement in safety and safety issues. I think more engagement means better safety performance. More input, then I hope will get more people's minds on this as an issue. I'll show you more about that coming up here. You might have seen some of this on the safety page connected to the home page. People are starting to contribute to our little program of basically giving testimony as to how I helped improve safety at B&L. And there's a whole slew of little videos available. I'm going to try to play the latest one here. I'm assured that the technology is up to this.
Several years ago, there was a fire in a hood similar to this through the use of a Bunsen burner, and the user was unable to shut off propane supply to the hood for numerous reasons. Number one, the isolation valve was hidden behind the hood. The valve was seized and the pipes were not labeled properly. I was able to acquire funding through the Safety Solutions program to replace the isolation valves, put them in a location that's more accessible, and also to label the piping. Due to these improvements, all the hoods in Building 490 are safer to work with. I'm Chris Harris, and I helped improve safety at B&L.
So there are a couple messages buried in that, I think. I mean, there's the content of what it is he did, but there's also the fact that he wanted to talk about it enough to subject himself to Alex or whoever did the video on this and go this probably 27 times till it sounded good and whatever. He made a commitment to communicate to the rest of us what he did. The other is the scope of what he did doesn't sound like a world-shaking accomplishment. I mean, it was a very targeted, relatively small improvement to a process that he understands very well. I think safety is mostly built out of stuff like that. It's not some new philosophy of safety. I've heard enough of those and preached enough of them already to little effect. What matters is that people actually pay attention in their own workplace to the little things that are actually either impeding their work or making it seem more risky to them, and thinking about how to make it better and then actually doing it. I think those are the real messages in this little video. So components of a safe workplace are mostly about using the available tools and also paying attention. So the recently completed institution of area-based PPE, which is well posted now in all the labs, this is an important thing. We've seen cases and quoted cases in discussions over this where somebody who was actually not doing the work in that area but was wearing the PPE required for that area actually avoided an injury due to some other event unrelated to their work. There was an important one at the Nano Center last year that I think you probably remember reading about. So area-based PPE is an important component of our toolkit. Lifting, I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of overexertion. A lot of that's associated with lifting during material handling. This is an important thing where training and mindfulness can avoid a lot of injuries. Wintertime, we talked about it extensively. We all get in and out of our cars every morning here when it's snowy, so this is everyone is in the risk category for this. Pay attention, stop reading your BlackBerry while you're walking across the ice. Just think about it. And work planning and control, I want to talk more about that in a minute, but I think this was actually the secret to the improvement, the sort of second half of the year improvement that we saw in several areas of F&O. Enhanced work planning, the areas where that was instituted started to see better performance with regard to safety. So let me talk a little bit about that. Everybody probably recognizes this, how you plan work. You define the scope, you identify and analyze the hazards, you develop implements and controls, you do the work. If you're paying attention, you know that there's something missing from here. It's this. Then you do feedback and improvement, and then next time you do it, you have continuous improvement here, supposedly. The problem is doing feedback and control just at the end of the work means there's been less than probably desirable engagement on the part of all the participants in the planning exercise in all the other steps. It doesn't create the expectation that, well, we're over here identifying hazards. I think I see one that my supervisor is not talking about. Shouldn't I speak up? Well, no, I have a chance after it's all over to mention that. Well, that doesn't seem appropriate in the case of identifying hazards. Same with developing and implementing controls. If it occurs to me, we could actually eliminate this hazard rather than making a new training requirement to deal with it. That's the time to talk about that, is when implementing controls, and so on. So the way to fix this is to move feedback and controls from a step in the process to some kind of overarching approach to the whole process. That is, it happens all the time throughout the process. That should lead to more conversations between workers and engineers and managers and planners than we have now. The constant feedback should lead to continual improvement at all steps in this, and that ought to result in greater safety. So if we think about integrated safety management and have this picture in mind instead of that 5-step picture that I showed you earlier, I think it can actually improve the way we respond to work planning and the way we do the work. Okay, I want to move on and talk a little bit about the blueprint. I've listed a number of things we've worked on during the past year, in fact the past 2 years, in the blueprint. You recall it's a very broad menu of improvement activities aimed at making the lab's operations more effective, more efficient, and able to accommodate a growing menu of work, since our aspirations are to grow the laboratory and its impact. People might question that, now that we're looking at lean times ahead, whether there's going to be any growth associated with that, and with the lab strategy. And of course, the plans are there for that, but it'll be slower in coming, I'm pretty sure. So can't we back off on all this stuff? And I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no, because when times are leaner, there's more competition. I think this is much premium on being effective and efficient in lean times, even if we're to some degree only maintaining our programs and only slowly growing them, than in a bullish period when we think we're going to be able to increase the lab by leaps and bounds. We need to be competitive in both those situations. And so I think the blueprint is important in all times. Some of the things we worked on. We actually articulated to ourselves what we think the lab's values are. We're now making that part of performance expectations for all of us. We instituted integrated facility management and completed a peer review and an employee survey on this. Now, this is an area where as I'm going to come to in a minute in more detail, because I think this is an area where there's a lot of work yet to be done and a lot of concern about whether this is headed in the right direction based on the input that I get from the laboratory. I'll come back to that. Research operations coordination and oversight is sort of the companion to integrated facility management on how the tenant interacts with the landlord, so to speak, how research actually gets conducted in our facilities. Leadership development and training, this has been a big effort this year in developing a model for what the set of competencies are that constitute good leadership at the laboratory, and then starting, as we're doing now, to evaluate all our present level 1 and level 2 leaders to see how they're doing against that model, and then fixing that as we need to. So this has been a big effort, which I expect to have a big payoff going forward in the future. We're working harder at developing succession plans, which is a very important aspect at all levels of the laboratory, and I think this has been kind of haphazard in some areas, and I think we're putting more attention on it now through HR and all of the directorates. We've instituted new business models for safety, for financial operations, and for HR, with deployed services in some cases, centralized services, or hybrids of the two in other cases. And I think those are beginning to yield benefits. We have a part of the blueprint called the Competitiveness Improvement Project, which I think is an extremely successful effort to apply Lean Sigma techniques to the work that we do every day to try to take unnecessary work out of many of our processes. A number of processes have been selected to go through this and have been significantly improved as a result of it, and to the point where we have actually trained experts in Lean Sigma techniques across the laboratory and are probably now in a position of seeing more interest in doing this in various areas than we know how to handle at the moment. So it's actually growing of its own accord, and I think will become an institutional practice here. So that's what I want blueprint projects to do. I want them to not only be projects that get finished, but to make a change in the laboratory that we know how to actually carry on into the future. We've instituted infrastructure planning at a higher level through the blueprint process. The area-based PPE we talked about before came about in conjunction with blueprint projects. We're making improvements now in the safety observation program, and instituted a institution-level risk management committee that now meets weekly to look at both the scientific and the operational risks to the laboratory, tried to rank them as in terms of what we need to pay attention to most importantly right now and what can wait, and then develop mitigating strategies for those. This is, of course, the work of management in general, but taking an institutional view of this with all the relevant players around the table is actually a higher level of attention on it than we've given it before. I think it's very important for us. And of course, we've done effectiveness reviews of the blueprint projects. I mentioned areas where I think we're making headway, and I wanted to come back to integrated facility management, which was probably the most ambitious piece of the blueprint, and it's about a year since it was rolled out, just at the beginning of FY11. And I would think it's fair to say that this effort has attracted more attention on the part of the staff and feedback from the staff than any other part of the blueprint, in part because everybody's involved in it. Either you're a tenant or a landlord here, and so when it comes to doing your work in some facility, and so everybody's touched by this. We have a history of doing these jobs a certain way, and the IFM was meant to institute a better way of approaching that, and I've heard plenty of stories both of successes in this area and of failures in this area, and even people telling me, well, that's not working, let's go back to the old way. I want to remind you that the old way is the way in which we blew up that well house. That is, loss of configuration management on an old facility, inappropriate use of procedures to maintain that facility, leaving it in an unsafe condition, and it blew up. Nobody got hurt, if you recall, because it blew up later that night, and it's in a kind of isolated location. But that's what the old way led to, and what led to a big investigation, a series of internal reviews, and a set of ideas about how to address those weaknesses called the Leadership Action Plan, and it got rolled up into the blueprint. So we're not going back to the old way. We're not blowing stuff up here anymore. And we're not unless we intend to as part of a research project. And we're going ahead with this. So I want to remind you that this is a long-term effort to get this thing fully built out. I think we understand through a lot of effort, the peer review, the survey, the interaction with the staff, where the weaknesses are. There are structural weaknesses and then also weaknesses of people being able to integrate this into their work after decades of doing it a different way. So a cultural issue. I think we can get over both, and we're going to get over both, and we're going to go ahead with the integrated facility management model. And I do believe over time the successes, which we're already seeing, will outweigh the problems, and we'll get the benefits that we were looking for. Okay, I'm going to spend a block of time now on the strategic a 10-year plan for the laboratory. This is this is not the slides that we showed to the Office of Science, but some condensed and I think actually more entertaining slides than what I did show. The ones we showed to the Office of Science were following a prescription we were given, and these are, what we thought was the way to present this stuff. So this slide is just to capture some of the ongoing work and tie it to our capabilities, which are really the basis of our strategic plan. What is it we're good at? And so we'll get into that in a minute, but I just want to run quickly through some major highlights of ongoing work. This is the construction of NSLS2. There's now significant amount of beamline accelerator equipment in the enclosure, and is starting to look like a real accelerator there. The building, of course, is very advanced, and the work on this I'll talk about a little later, but it's been outstanding. We're another construction project underway. Here's a photograph of the recent status of the Interdisciplinary Science Building, which is funded by the Strategic Lab Infrastructure Program in the Office of Science, and is meant to concentrate and house all of our assets, or most of our assets, related to the energy strategy that we've talked about before. Down here is RIC, operating now, going into its 12th annual operations soon, And here's a picture of the electron beam ion source, a new source for the ions that are collided in these rings and in other facilities that we run at the Collider Accelerator Department. So this is a new piece of equipment that will be commissioned for use with Rick this year. It allows us greater flexibility in the kinds of ions we use in there, including heavier than gold ions up to uranium, and is a big part of our continually advancing capabilities at RIC to provide science, more science and faster science to improve detectors at RIC. Oh, and sorry, didn't mention up here, the Long Island Solar Farm. This is not actually a Brookhaven project, but relates heavily to our energy strategy. I'll mention that some more later, but this thing is truly impressive and essentially almost finished now with all 168,000 of these panels deployed, and we'll have some sort of event to mark the completion of that coming up soon. So I'm going to remind you what our vision, mission, and strategy are for our 10-year plans. Vision, let me just say that's what we want to be when we grow up. Mission, what we want to do. Strategy is how we're going to do it. So our vision is to be, well, the best lab in the DOE system. We want to be the provider of choice for the science that supports the Office of Science's own mission. The mission is twofold: to advance photon sciences, energy and environment-related research, and apply them to problems of importance to the nation that are facing us right now. And the other is to advance fundamental research, particularly in nuclear and particle physics, to gain a deeper understanding of the workings of the world around us. Strategy is related to the mission. It's to make sure that our big facilities, the light source and RIC, remain in leadership positions by moving from NSLS to NSLS2 and by enhancing RIC with what's called ERIC, which we'll talk about later, the next version of a leadership machine for the kind of forefront nuclear physics research that we do. This complicated chart is supposed to capture the whole strategic plan on one slide in the form of a wiring diagram, in a way. It's relating what it is we're good at. That's 12 core capabilities that the laboratory has as recognized by the Office of Science. I can read through them in a second. And then the projects we're going to do with those capabilities. And the wiring diagram consists in showing you which capabilities contribute to which projects. The capabilities are actually 12 in number. As I mentioned, they're grouped into 5 related capabilities just to keep this diagram from looking hopelessly complicated. For example, I have up here, I have no light coming from that anymore. Nuclear physics, particle physics, and applied nuclear science and technology. Condensed matter physics and material science, chemical and molecular science. Applied materials, science and technology, and chemical engineering. And I'm not going to read them all. Just giving you the idea that these 12 are grouped in 5 categories of related capabilities. The projects that constitute our laboratory-level initiatives, the major projects or programs are in photon sciences, that's the light sources, QCD matter, that's nuclear physics, energy, we'll talk more about that in a minute, the physics of the universe, that's really high energy physics, and climate, environment, and biosciences. And the dots here are meant to indicate that these draw on 2 or more of our groups of 12 core capabilities. There are also some things that we pursue at the next level down and called directorate initiatives, although some of them have as broad a reach across the laboratory as the major initiatives. That's accelerator science and technology, biological imaging, homeland national security, and computation. And you can see those touch several or more of the core capability groups as well. So that's, in a nutshell, what I'm going to now go through, at least at the level. Sorry, I can't. Now I got to be two-handed here. At the level of these major initiatives, I'll talk about these things in a little more detail. Oh, well, I bet I turned this thing off. There's an on-off switch on here. Nope. I think you can put some batteries in that while I do this by other means. Okay, so let's talk about photon sciences as the first of the major initiatives already. This is focused on building, operating, and exploiting NSLS-2, which will be the brightest synchrotron light source in the world when it's done in 2014. It's well along. It's more than 60% complete right now. And we are focused on what will be a very important piece of its turn-on, and that is the transition from NSLS. The good news and the bad news is that we already have a vibrant and active light source user community here at the laboratory. There's more than 2,000 people a year coming here to use NSLS. And in the process, as the funding goes down for running that and the funding comes up for operating NSLS-2, there's going to be a period of diminished service to that community. We expect to build up the user community and the beamlines and end stations and so on for NSLS-2 in record time relative to other new such facilities coming online, but record time still means a number of years, several years to get up to capacity that's similar to what NSLS has now. And so this is an important step to show good science and great science coming out of NSLS-2 quickly after we shut off NSLS, which, as you know, has been the home to research that led to 2 Nobel Prizes. I might even count this year's prize on quasi-crystals, although the prize winner didn't work here. Much of the important work was also done at NSLS. Anyway, it's going out of business, and we are replacing it with something new and much better performance. But if it's not on, all that great performance is not worth much. So getting it on quickly and making the transition quickly with beamlines and so on, heading towards a user community that's much larger than we currently have at NSLS is really a major focus of the project, of the Photon Sciences Directorate, and of the whole laboratory, because this is a laboratory initiative. It will be capable of carrying on the science that NSLS does now. In other words, a very broad spectrum of science in the structure and properties of matter, but at a much finer level of detail and resolution, spatial resolution, energy resolution, time resolution, etc. So it's a tremendous leap forward in the capabilities for a whole range of scientific problems and technologies, especially in the energy area, that come from solving those scientific problems. That's about as much time as I'm going to be able to devote to each of these if I'm going to finish in enough time to have questions. So let me talk now briefly about QCD matter. This is the operation of RIC and what comes after RIC. This machine has been spectacularly successful. We believe it has another 5, probably 10 years of productive research to do with 2 very active experimental collaborations there. This collaboration, the STAR collaboration, is represented by Ralph Brown, Bill Christie, and a guy who, I forget his name, but I think he's now at the Department of Energy giving us the money. So that's Tim Hallman, the former spokesman of STAR. So through the improvements I mentioned earlier to all aspects of the accelerator and to the detectors, we will be able to go further with the RIC program of exploring the fundamentals of matter that reacts to the strong nuclear force, and also, as you know, understand more about what the universe was like a few microseconds after the Big Bang. So we're interested in, now that we have competition in this field with the Large Hadron Collider, which occasionally runs heavy ions also and at a much higher energy and can also contribute to this body of knowledge, we're interested in enhancing the capabilities of RHIC to maintain it in the forefront of this field. I actually believe it is the forefront machine in this field, in spite of the fact that the energy is much higher at the Large Hadron Collider. Turns out that energy, the highest possible energy, doesn't help go after the really fundamental problems that we're interested in here, which is how matter makes its transition from ordinary nuclear matter to a soup of quarks and gluons and back, and what the properties of that soup are. That's a longer story, but take my word for it. This is the machine you want to be working at, not at the Large Hadron Collider. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir, so it's easy. It's a little tougher sell in Washington, but we're making very good headway in that issue. I think they understand the backstory behind that claim I just made to you. So, with regard to the future, and I'm talking about the early part of the next decade, when we could imagine finishing and operating a machine that goes beyond RHIC, a machine in which we add an electron ring to RHIC and call it imaginatively eRHIC. This is an extension into new aspects of the fundamentals of quantum chromodynamics, the theory of the strong nuclear force, and its implications for the structure of matter. And that's all I'll say about it at this time. With regard to energy, the issue here is one of developing or enhancing here at the laboratory a pathway from fundamental scientific discoveries to the deployment of meaningful technologies. So discovery to deployment, to have an impact on those 21st century problems I mentioned earlier, is what this energy strategy is all about. We focused on a number of areas in this energy strategy where we think our capabilities and our partnerships and our connections to the state as well as to the federal government give us the most impact. These are, broadly speaking, working on the electric infrastructure and on sustainable chemical conversions. So think electric infrastructure, think about the generation, the transmission of electrical energy without adding to the carbon load, and with the ability to include variable renewable sources of energy in a new grid that has, among other things, storage capability to smooth out the demand and response, and also has intelligence so that you can look at the performance of the grid and monitor it and control it in real time, rather than waiting for all the lights to go out and then asking, well, what just happened and where? Sustainable chemical conversions, think about catalysts, like in the catalytic converter in your car, catalysts for use in fuel cells, and also photocatalysis for directly converting sunlight to fuel. So we work on various research topics in those broad areas, and we partner with industry and universities, other laboratories, and in particular the state of New York, where we have a very good relationship with the state's Energy Research and Development Authority, and state-based partners like General Electric, Stony Brook, of course, other universities and research institutions in the state. Physics of the universe, high-energy physics. The idea of this piece of strategy is to maintain the leadership position, intellectual and technical leadership position that the laboratory enjoys in a number of areas in high energy and particle physics. we're delving into the most fundamental questions about the universe in this area. That does require the highest energy to get to a time earlier than when the world was the perfect liquid we discovered at Rick. And the field in this country defines the approach to this as being a three-pronged approach: the so-called energy frontier, the intensity frontier, and the cosmology frontier. So the highest energies you can get at, and that's at the Large Hadron Collider with protons colliding there. The intensity frontier, studying very rare processes with very high-powered beams of particles, and cosmology frontier, looking out into the cosmos and trying to understand some complementary things about the universe. Areas where we work in these are, of course, the ATLAS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, where Brookhaven is the key U.S. Member of the U.S. part of that collaboration. The intensity frontier, we're mostly focused on neutrinos, which is experiments in China starting right now at the Diabei experiment. And in the future, maybe a long baseline neutrino oscillation experiment in an underground cavern at the Homestake mine in South Dakota or someplace. And cosmology, the big question, and this year's Nobel Prize in Physics was for the discovery of dark energy. Nobody knows what it is, but it's causing the universe's expansion to accelerate. And working on this telescope, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, a project we've been involved in for a long time, is, at least our interest in it is focused on the dark energy problem, although this telescope can basically do all of astronomy in one go. We also do accelerator R&D related to future machines for high-energy physics, as well as for industrial and medical applications of accelerators. Finally, climate, environment, and biosciences. The idea of our strategic position here is to understand this systems, that is, the relationships among climate change, energy use, and ecosystems on the planet, so that we can have an impact on not only the understanding of what gives rise to global warming, but what to do about how we should behave in the face of global climate change in order to prosper. So among those things is determining the microphysics of climate change, understanding how aerosols and the formation of clouds affects the climate through new kinds of data collection and simulation. Also doing work in plant science to find ways of extracting carbon neutral energy from biomass. Also in biology, systems biology, developing, we have a strong collaborative role in a nationwide effort to develop a knowledge base to support the study of systems biology. This is an important win for the laboratory this year. And of course, at the light source, the structural biology I mentioned earlier, and soon work in synthetic biology. Partnerships are as important here as in the energy strategy I talked about earlier, and we have them with Cold Spring Harbor, with Stony Brook, with Yale on some specific issues. Yale with regard to this knowledge base, Cold Spring Harbor in plants, Stony Brook in medical imaging, and many others. But those partnerships are an important part of our strategy in the climate, environment, and biosciences. Just a little bit on the related opportunities now. This computation. Computation is involved in all the work we do. We have some high-performance computing on site, and we have been running the New York Center for Computational Science for 4 or 5 years. based on a large Blue Gene L computer that we have, and which is now, being 4 or 5 years old, is one step away from the junkyard. And we're looking at the grandson of Blue Gene L, which is Blue Gene Q, and are buying a significant amount of it here in conjunction, Brookhaven in conjunction with Riken and Columbia University will be putting a significant amount of, this total is about 5 times what we have on site right now in the form of high performance computing, and it will fit in a fraction of the space. And I hope later this year we'll start to get this installed. This is mostly serving the needs of Brookhaven science programs and Riken science programs, and Columbia's work on this type of computer and also its science programs. But beyond that, we need to replace the Blue Gene L and refresh the New York Center for Computational Science so we can continue to serve the many users in the state that currently use it. So we're part of a collaboration within the state of New York to focus the attention of NISTAR, one of the state agencies, on the refresh of our computer here and the one up at RPI with new Blue Gene Q computing capability of the multiple petaflops sort, so several thousand teraflops at each facility in the near future. More important than the hardware, though, is what are we doing with it? And it turns out that there are a number of important opportunities or activities that use high-performance computing and can use more of it. Our work in theory work in support of study of quantum chromodynamics, modeling accelerators, the systems, biological system science I mentioned earlier, modeling the smart grid, and so on. There are many capabilities that need high performance or higher capacity computing than we have on site now. So this has to be a part of our growth agenda as well. Also mention quickly accelerator science and technology. This is, to some degree, a collaboration with Stony Brook on a new center for accelerator science and education, and developing other applications besides accelerator, the next generation of research accelerator. For example, for hadron therapy facilities, for cancer therapy, and so on. Biological imaging is a long-time high-impact science capability here at the laboratory. We're now looking to, we've expanded that to include the imaging of plants in the service of our bioenergy programs, but also seeking through a partnership with Stony Brook to maintain our preeminence in human and animal imaging and health-related studies. Homeland and national security as well. We have a small but a strong program in nuclear detectors based on our detector capabilities and the radiological assistance program and so on. So there are activities at the next level down from institutional where there's growth potential for these to become institutional level activities in some cases. I wanted to finish by talking about going back to this issue of the discovery to deployment pipeline and talk about some activities that we have here at the lab to support the development of an innovation ecosystem for the region. I don't know if it's mentioned on this slide, but or maybe a later slide, but there's currently ongoing in the state an economic development activity that's centered on 10 regions within the state. We're part of the Council for Economic Development in the Long Island region and are contributing through that. But other things going on directly here on Long Island include Accelerate Long Island, which is a the brainchild of the Brookhaven Town Supervisor, Mark Lesko, and brings together some of the major research assets on Long Island into a group that is trying to make a better connection with investors, entrepreneurs, sources of capital and service, and other partnerships on the island and in the region to try to make the pipeline of discovery to deployment broader and stronger for this area. Just looking at Brookhaven, and we've had a couple of technology showcases recently under the rubric of the Accelerate Long Island, where Brookhaven technologies have been shown to rooms full of entrepreneurs and investors, and it's resulted in some very interesting discussions now ongoing that could lead to commercialization of some of our technologies. This was a record year this past year for records of invention from Brookhaven, 34. Also, an important year for Brookhaven leadership within the Department of Energy in developing new techniques for tech transfer, new techniques for getting technologies out to potential commercializers for low fees, and so on. The commercializations and technology partnerships division in the GARS Directorate under Walt Copan has been an important leader for us in all of these areas, and as well as moving along our whole internal discovery to deployment activity. I'm not going to, given the time, I'm not going to read through all this. I told you I've listed all of these for you in the Monday memo over the year. It's interesting to just count them up, and there's some, you've got to be careful of double counting because there are actually people here who've won more than one award this year. But there's of order 30 of our scientists, a reasonable fraction of our scientists here, who have been recognized this year in one program or another at anywhere from the local level, the community level, all the way to the national level, and some from Battelle in between. The list goes on. I'm just going to mention very briefly, looking at awards to the whole laboratory, the recent designation of Brookhaven as an historic site by the American Physical Society. I was very proud of the whole laboratory for, and all of the history of the laboratory for leading up to this designation, and it's recent, so I'm calling that out, but I'm going to have to leave you to find your own name on this list as I talk. Okay, now this is the part where it's like a backwards meal. Instead of getting to eat your ice cream if you ate the broccoli, now you get the broccoli at the end. We're in a continuing resolution right now, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, since in the last 150 years, I think we've started off with a continuing resolution every year. So we don't know our budget yet for FY12. We're going along at last year's levels with no new starts, at least for another month or so, and I don't know what will happen at the end of that. Maybe an omnibus bill that covers the entire federal funding package. Congress may actually pass individual budget bills, and for instance, in our case, both the Senate and the House have passed energy and water appropriations bills. They're not commensurate and would need a conference committee and so on. I don't know whether there's enough collegiality left to have such a thing, or whether there will be some kind of grand solution like there was last year. So we're proceeding cautiously, as we have had to in the beginnings of recent years. We still expect and plan for some growth of our missions, not all of it, of course, funded federally. In fact, some of the growth areas look like they'll have to be work for others primarily. And flat is the new sign of success in the world. So we're expecting flat funding in 12. 13 is more of a stretch, I fear, but I don't know. And so we have to be looking at contingency plans in the case of less than flat funding. And there's been instructions to all federal agencies over the past month or so to actually look at significant decreases in funding in the out years, so we have to be ready for that. As I'll show you in a minute, our operating budgets are pretty stable, and so we're hoping that we'll be okay in that area. But we'll also have, in a natural way, we'll have some slowdown of construction activity over the next several years. So we have to plan for all that. This is a big, busy table that shows you by program what we actually spent in FY11, or what our actual budgets were in FY11, our projections for 12 based on what we know now, and a little bit more wild projections going beyond that for 13. The main things you can see, I'll just call your attention to the operating budgets. We expect a very slight decrease in 12 relative to 11. So this does not mean things are going to run as normal, because things, you may have noticed, tend to cost more as time goes on. So this may still lead to slight reductions in operations, or depending on how the budgets actually break out, maybe even more than slight reductions. But right now, this is, I think, a pretty good story as best we can tell. You start to see declines in construction over the next couple of years, but most of that is because we're finishing NSLS2 over that period of time, or the bulk of it. We're finishing the interdisciplinary science building and the various stimulus program projects that we worked on. So that's going down as expected. What's not so nice in this picture is that some of the increases in spending, like on the next interdisciplinary science building and the next one after that, are now showing as pushed out pretty far on the DOE's schedule because of their expectations about flat or worse than flat funding. So the SLI program is not funded as aggressively as we originally planned, and to the point where it will actually become the limiting factor in how much we can grow our programs. If we can't get the new high-quality lab space on the schedule we wanted, then it'll take longer to get those new programs up to where we wanted them to be. So that's the construction story. You see some significant growth down here in work for others. This growth is actually mostly, pardon me, mostly having to do with constructing beam lines for NSLS2 with other people's money. So the NIH is putting a lot of money into beam lines over and above what the DOE is putting in, and so on. So there's some good news in that. Also, off the chart, starting in 14 and accelerating beyond that, is increase in operating funds because we expect NSLS2 to be operating, and its operations are require significantly more funding than NSLS operations. It's just a bigger operation. It has better support for the beam lines. That means more scientists employed, and so there will be a budget for running NSLS2, which is of order $100 million per year more than what it costs to run NSLS, and comparable to what we're currently spending on running RIC. So that's good for beyond the end of this chart. Okay, so I've told you what I know and what I don't know about the budgets and everything else. I think it's time for questions if you have them, and I'll answer the ones I can. Joanna.
Sam, I wanted to share something with you. I was just down at the Biological and Environmental Research Advisory Committee meeting down at DOE, and Bill Brinkman was there to talk to the committee, and out in the hall I went to say hello to him, and he said hello, and he says, "Oh, Brookhaven, you just had a radiological accident." And so, I was disappointed because I would have thought he would have brought up, QCD or LSST or the NSLS2, but you're not exaggerating when you say it goes all the way up the flagpole.
Yeah,
So-
I had a interesting video conference with Bill late last week when the DOE decided they hadn't been kept sufficiently informed about our progress in cleaning up and investigating that radiological incident. I guess I could say he was hopping mad, but he was sitting down at the time, so I couldn't quite tell.
Okay, but one of the follow-ups is, since I found out about it from him, and people in my group found out about it on the radio, and since our group works with radioactivity, I worry about this kind of thing, and I think it would be really good to share with us what exactly happened. I heard it might have been a cracked sealed source, but I would like to be able to examine our sealed sources in the group, because it's a long time lag between when that happened and when we're going to be able to look over these things, if indeed that's what it was. So I think it would be good to have a more timely information exchange when something like that happens so that we can mitigate the future.
It's a very good point. In fact, we struggled with that at the end of last week. We actually, at the very close of business on Friday, sent a mail to everybody at the lab about this incident. It was pretty brief. It was pretty brief because we had been spending the last 24 hours working with Bill Brinkman's office on a statement that would go to the media. That's how come you heard it on the radio, too. In the end, the thing that we put together, which was about a page or 2 or 3 paragraphs of information, was condensed to 2 or 3 sentences by the Office of Science, and that what went out to the media. And at that point, I didn't want to do another round and wait till Monday to tell everybody everything, so we sent the very same statement out to the lab staff Friday afternoon also. But it's true that you need more information. I actually had an emergency meeting of the Policy Council about this on Friday afternoon also. And to get at least the ALDs thinking about what they had to do in the way of a stand-down in their directorates. And we're on the hook to produce plans for those stand-downs this week. So you'll be involved a lot more in this now. And all I had available to give the staff on Friday was what you saw. Other questions? Got any, Jim, from the airwaves?
We had a couple of questions that came in on the same topic. Will there be a salary increase in 2012? And if not, why are performance assessment reviews still important?
Right. We actually had that same question at last year's meeting, or some meeting in here last year, about why bother with performance appraisals when you can't give us a pay raise. But let's talk about the pay raise first. We will be, this is pretty recent information from discussions with the Secretary. We will be held again this year to a less than normal pay raise situation to mimic the federal workers' 2-year pay raise. The only amelioration compared to last year is that this, let me go back to last year. We had available a 2% pay raise pool last year. 0.5% that was built into our original plans for adjustments and promotions. And then later in the year, they decided, whoops, we made a mistake in how we handle contractors relative to feds, and they gave us another 1.5%, which, as you recall, that total amount of 2% was distributed in part to a general adjustment to everybody of 1%, and then funds available to the directorates to fix local or particular cases where adjustments were necessary. But we were told it was just for adjustments. This year, the 2% is sort of a lump sum that we'll get, and with less restrictions on how to apportion it. I think I'm not sure about this. I'm making this up to some degree, but the way that conversation went, I believe it still will not be a merit-based pay raise. I think it will be based on merit, on adjustments and promotions again. But if Bob Lincoln is here, he may be, or Bob Kelly maybe can. So that's correct according to Bob Lincoln. So unfortunately, we will not have what I would normally give as a pay raise, ask for approval of a pay raise package that's more like 3% or a little above 3%, as I would have been doing. We won't have that much available this year. And we'll have some restrictions, but less than we had last year on that 2% package. Now, since I can't do a merit-based pay raise, why would I bother evaluating the performance of people? I think the answer is the same as last year. In part, I'm looking forward to the time when this freeze is over and I can actually reward people for their performance. And if it has to be integrated over 3 years instead of 1 year, then that's what it will be. But this has got to have an effect on salary increases when those merit-based ones come back that I wouldn't have information on if we didn't do performance appraisals. But more importantly, well, maybe it's not more important. Maybe the salary increase is the whole story. But I think there's more to the story, and that is the conversations between you and your supervisor that seem only to happen in some cases around performance appraisal time are really important for your career development, your progress through the ranks at the laboratory, and so on. We do have money available for promotions, after all, and people who get promoted are generally the high performers in their current classification. So there's value to the relationship to the laboratory and to your direct supervisor and to your career path from being able to recognize good performance, even if it's a year in which I can't give merit increases. So we're going to keep doing them because it's because of those factors. Les.
Can you say anything about the reports of neutrinos moving faster than the speed of light?
I don't believe it. I mean, even if I didn't know what you were asking me, something that earth-shaking, I'd bet against it just on my experience with the odds. But to be honest, I think that experiment has potential for timing errors that may mask the whole effect. And I think, I'm not sure that it's consistent with, maybe somebody in the audience can tell me, how consistent is this with the supernova 1987A? Right. So,
if the same effect were there for the supernova neutrinos, they should have arrived several years before the light from the supernova. So, there are arguments people can make, conspiracy theories. We allow that.
Did you hear that, Les?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Phil.
Probably a simple question, but your previous slide, one about finances, showed an increase of about 5% in the nuclear physics budget going from FY11 to FY12. And yet our guidance so far is that we should plan on no better than flat funding from FY11.
You're talking about up here.
If you're really using these numbers to judge what kind of lab overhead that you will get from an FY12 budget, I worry a lot. Can you comment?
Okay, I need help with the details of that number. Steve?
Well, if you remember back to our meeting at 11 this morning, Bill had said that those numbers included what had been laid out as a $7 million increase in work for others. Nuclear physics was discussed and then decided was not a realistic number. But that's what that number was based on. The full increase that you see there in the FY12 projection is not in DOE funding, it's not in Office of Science funding.
So you're telling me now you now think I shouldn't show on this chart either?
There will be some increase, not $7 million.
Okay,
But that's information as of 2 hours.
thank you. Other questions? Phil?
Just as a follow-up to that, work for others has a separate line on your chart.
So you're worried about double counting somewhere down here.
There may be some double counting, as Suzanne told me, that increases the work for others.
The subtotal says DOE operating.
Good point, Stephanie, and so I'm confused. Okay, so take $7 million out of here for now, and that's what you should compare. Other questions? Anything else, Jim?
Yeah, no more.
Anybody in the bleachers? Steve?
Perhaps the email didn't get through to Jim, but I'm aware of an email that was sent. Do you have any knowledge of any other emails?
I'm sorry, we had some about increases.
Okay.
Should I ask it?
Yeah, the email had been forwarded to me, and I put it forward through the Brookhaven Organization of Scientists. The question was, I think, deliberately asked very anonymously. The question is regarding your personal management bonus.
Mine.
Yours.
Okay.
Would your bonus be greater, the individual wanted to know, if there were no safety incidents at the laboratory over the course of the year, or if scientists at the laboratory won the Nobel Prize?
I see I missed an opportunity in crafting my incentive compensation goals. But the answer is, with regard to safety, is yes. I have two ways. I mean, I have some personal incentive compensation goals related to the performance of the laboratory, and that would be decremented if, for example, the lab's, whether or not the lab's performance rating scorecard was changed, I would suffer in my self-evaluation and in my boss's evaluation with regard to my incentive compensation. In addition to that, I put laboratory outcomes as a risk factor in the incentive compensation for the entire senior management, those that are eligible to it. So if our DOE score goes down and the partners get less fee, everybody who gets incentive compensation gets less by a multiplicative factor that relates to the fraction of fee that is earned. So the answer to that question is yes, two ways for me, and yes for everybody who's eligible.
Just the other half of the question, I think what the individual was trying to get at by the question was the priorities at the laboratory. I mean, to what extent is your management bonus and as a measure of the priority of the laboratory increased by the good science that's done?
Some of my incentive compensation goals have to do, of course, not with winning Nobel Prizes, but with scientific outcomes or progress in pursuit of scientific outcomes. And so if we do well in those areas, then I get to give myself a higher grade. And so I may be eligible for more incentive compensation. up to whatever limit I'm contractually allowed to access. But those are pretty general. I mean, I'm not dumb enough to bet on a Nobel Prize when I write out my goals. But I do bet on things I think I have some control over, like the success of the RIC program or the NSLS2 project or things like that. And yes, so I get closer to, the limit of IC if those things do well, and I can take some credit for that. Then if, a bunch of it's at risk because of operational outcomes or failure to move those things along. So like anybody else's goals here at the laboratory, performance goals or incentive compensation goals or whatever. Any other questions? Can you top that one? Hey, sorry.
How are you, Sam? In reference to the blueprint, I know you had a review committee come around and they spoke to a number of us that take care of your service, as far as the electricians, plumbers, carpenters, etc. Did you get any feedback from them as to what we were saying?
Absolutely. It was clear that we had not met when we did that survey or did those interviews in conjunction with the peer review, that we had not really met our expectations in delivery of services. I think that's apparent that we haven't. The question is, why we haven't and what we can do to address those deficiencies in the implementation of the new program. So that's where all the focus is actually right now, in addressing what are the reported and apparent failure to meet expectations in IFM.
In keeping with the competitive nature of the economy as it stands right now,
yes,
looking at the users and us being the service providers, the customers are not happy in that it takes too much time for us to get to the actual service.
Right.
There's a slew of paperwork that's now involved. We had things on one side of the lab that may have been working fine. Customers were happy. And I understand you had an incident with the pump house, but to kill a whole system for an incident that happened over there, as significant as it is, and I understand we got to make sure we safeguard ourselves not to facilitate a reoccurrence, but we had a system. As far as, I know I can speak for, in our section with the electrical department, we had a system where we had morning meetings. We were getting out there, the work was getting done. There wasn't 8 pages of paperwork involved in it. And the customer was happy. We don't have that anymore.
I agree. The way we're trying to do it now is not implemented to the point where that level of satisfaction is back. But I want to address one other point that you made, and that is you recognize the significance of that thing that happened over there, namely the well house blew up, but that wasn't the case in your shop. We did a bunch of reviews after understanding that incident itself to see the extent of condition across the laboratory and also the extent of similar causal effects that caused that event across the laboratory. And what we found was that there was significant across the laboratory extent of both conditions and causes. Now, I can't speak to your shop in particular, although the fact that there was no paper trail for the work you did makes me worry a little bit about configuration control, and that was a contributory effect in the explosion of the well house. But leave that aside. I'm just telling you that in general, with the exception of our big accelerator operations where things seemed better, there was very extensive appearance of these same issues that were found in the causal analysis of blowing up that well house. And that's why, not because Secretary Chu, before he was a member of the Department of Energy, used to complain about the Department of Energy as a place where if one person got cancer, everybody got chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about.
Pretty much.
But I'm telling you that this is a pretty widespread problem that we have. Most of those conditions that we found We can go back over and look at the many judgments of need that were produced in those investigations and the reports, if you're interested. You find them everywhere across the laboratory. That's why we had to take a lab-wide approach to this.
Finally, from the bottom looking up, it seems as if we have a reverse pyramid effect going on, whereas we're top-heavy on management. We've got X amount of managers, X amount of supervisors, to a small amount of workers. And the general consensus amongst the men and the ladies that work with us as well is that it's frustrating. Materials aren't available. Things aren't going smooth.
Right.
And it changes the whole attitude of the general worker at the laboratory. And I don't know if anyone looked into that, thought about it, or if they even care.
No, we definitely care. That's very significant what you just said, and we recognize that as the feedback, both from the peer review and from the interviews and the survey that was done before that, that's what the problem is, that we are not addressing the customer's needs as well as they were appeared to be before, let alone better, which was our intention. So there's a lot of work to do. I recognize that the way it is now is not going to fix the problems you're pointing to. That's why we need to fix the way we're doing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Jim?
I think we have one more from email. I think we have time for this last one. How does the $500 million loan guarantee by Solyndra from DOE affect BNL funding?
I don't think it affects it at all. It may affect the Department of Energy through or the government even, because of all the accusations about mishandling are going around. So I suppose you could make up a story about various people losing their jobs and then the department's philosophy changing, and then that somehow affects the lab's funding. I don't have that much faith in the DOE bureaucracy to respond that directly to that big a threat, but maybe. But I have no idea what that would be like. So there's no direct connection, really. Okay, there's another few minutes and one in the bleachers.
Sam, you mentioned that the solar farm is nearly completed. How far along is the research aspect of that?
Okay, in case you couldn't hear, the question is about the solar farm. The power plant is nearly done. How are we doing in terms of our research agenda with that? Pat, tell us.
Okay, so the solar farm has been completely outfitted with monitoring equipment across the full field. It's ready to take data. Just that, or just shortly after the time that Long Island Solar Farm becomes operational, which will be November 1st. Currently scheduled for November 1st, so we should be able to take data at that time. That research? That is research. I mean, we are taking
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions? Last question. This is just about to 3 o'clock. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for being here.